Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Crazy Amazing Humans podcast. Thank you so much for joining us from wherever you are on this crazy, amazing planet. I'm Katrina Carlson.
And I'm Jefferson Denham. We believe it is more important than ever to stay connected, stay positive, and stay active. And if you agree, you are definitely in the right place. So, Katrina, why did the old man fall in the well? Because he couldn't see that well. Okay, here's another one you may not care for. Today at the bank, an old lady asked me to help check her balance, so I pushed her over.
Jefferson.
Wait. One more. I couldn't figure out why the baseball kept getting larger. Then it hit me.
Okay.
Thank you for those little laughs of pity. Okay, what do those three things have in common?
They're meant to make us roll our eyes and groan.
No. Well, maybe. No, they're all dad jokes, don't you know?
I love it. I honestly love dad jokes. Those are so cute and very apropos, being that Father's Day is right around the corner and you are a father of two yourself. So this is why, though, I'm really excited.
By the way, happy Father's Day to Ken.
Thank you. Thank you. And happy Father's Day to you, of course, and everyone else who's listening who might be a father. But this goes way beyond that, our next guest, but it's why I'm really excited to feature him. His name is Dr. David Kuhl. He's from the organization Blueprint, and Blueprint is at the forefront of a movement to help men move towards a more aspirational masculinity. Basically, they believe that the features of fatherhood and being a man are significant to global and public health issues, and they seek to understand the experience of the impact of being a man, of fathering, and that of being fathered, inquiring how fathers' behaviors, values, and norms affect their children. Those kinds of things.
And guess what? They do. We all know that. True. They affect their children.
Yes, they do.
Affect everyone around them. So while Blueprint's focus is on men, their work is gender inclusive and it strives for healthier communities. So they believe in the possibility of all genders striving together for a more equitable, compassionate, and sustainable world. Blueprint demonstrates what is possible for diverse communities by deepening the connection between all members within that community, making a profound impact on enhancing safety and inclusiveness for all.
I like that. It's just, that's important to create that space for everybody. Right. So, and I'm not going to lie, you and I both had tears in our eyes during this next interview. I mean, this is a tearjerker. This is something that will cut to the core of your heart. Everybody out there in the audience, I promise you that. And it's definitely not just for men. So you just know that Blueprint also bases their philosophy and programs on thorough research, proof of change, and in on-the-ground programming. So if you have family and friends that would benefit from hearing these kinds of things, and just wait, I think everyone will, please call them now. Have them listen along with you or share it with them later.
Definitely.
You're gonna like this episode.
Yes, you are. So as you know, dear audience, we're always looking to bring you the most uplifting and inspiring stories and practical information. So please check out our website at crazyamazinghumans.com and make sure that you are subscribed to our newsletters so that we can keep you informed and stay in touch with you.
We truly and most sincerely appreciate you. And we are on a mission to inspire you and remind you that you are crazy amazing.
I want you to feel, I want you to feel something crazy, crazy amazing.
Today's episode of the Crazy Amazing Humans podcast is brought to you via Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. All episodes are free, so make sure and subscribe today.
Part 1. So, how do you do this man thing?
And how can it benefit everyone? Hey everyone, we are here with Dr. David Kuhl, who is a professor in the Departments of Family Practice and Urologic Sciences, Faculty of Medicine at the University of British Columbia. After completing his training in family practice in 1987, he practiced medicine as a family physician and then went deep into palliative care, improving life and providing comfort to people of all ages with serious chronic and life-threatening diseases.
Beginning in 2015, David focused his work on the health, integrity, and well-being of men for the benefit of families and communities. In that context, along with two co-founders, Doctors Duncan Shields and John Izzo, David created a university-based nonprofit organization, Blueprint, or Blueprint.ngo, that strives through research, service, and influence to impact society by improving men's well-being and enhancing their positive contributions to families and communities.
Oh, yes, David, welcome to the Crazy Amazing Humans podcast.
Thank you.
How are you today?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Amazing. So we're so happy to share your story and your organization with our audience today. Can you unpack a bit more about what drew you to focusing on the health, integrity, and well-being of men in the first place?
Yes, I'd be pleased to. But before I do that, I want to thank you for inviting me to join you in this conversation. I'm very excited about it and pleased to interact with you about the work that we're doing. There were several features, I think, that contributed to my decision to put my stethoscope down and begin to look at issues that may be of concern to men. As you mentioned, I worked in palliative care for a number of years. It was at a time when HIV and AIDS was very untreatable. And so there were a lot of young men who died on the palliative care unit. And what I learned from them, one in particular, a quick story, is a young man came to the station that I was sitting at writing notes and asked if he could use the phone. I said, of course. I gave him the phone, and he called his dad. And he said, Dad, I have three things to say to you. One, I need you to know that I'm gay. And because of the proximity, I could hear the silence at the other end. And then he said, and I have HIV and AIDS, Dad. And again, it was silent. And the third thing he said, I'm on a palliative care unit, Dad, and that means I'm dying. And still it was silent. The silence was screaming at that point. And he seemed like a boy to me. He was probably in his early 20s, put the receiver on the phone and walked away. And what I realized in that moment was I think a seed that planted the work I'm doing today in terms of where is the father? Would I be there if this was my son? And it took years before it germinated into the program I'm working with, but it did contribute to my desire to go back to school and study psychology because I'd been very immersed in medicine and proud to be a physician, pleased to be a physician. But I really wanted to explore what was the experience of living with the knowledge that people were dying. So I went back to university, and my supervisor for my doctoral work invited me to work with him in a project that was designed to help men in the transition from military to civilian life. So it was a trauma-based program. We looked at the trauma they'd experienced in their military careers. It was a 10-day program over a period of time. And inevitably, after they'd addressed their trauma, they would say to me, and David, can you help me be a good dad? How can I be a good dad with all of this trauma in my life? So again, another seed. And so in 2013, 2014, I decided to take a sabbatical to ask the question, did I really want to stop what I was doing to focus on something that would look at men? And part of that sabbatical included reading a book by Lynn Twist called Soul of Money. It's all about philanthropy and people's relationships with money and what does that mean. But in the book, she gives an account of a conference she attended in 1995. It was the Beijing Congress of Women, and they had a human rights tribunal at the Congress, and three women, one from Delhi, one from Bosnia, and one from Guatemala, talked about their experience of why they wanted to come to this meeting. One of them had watched all of her pets, her livestock, her 11 children murdered in front of her because she wouldn't disclose where her husband was hiding, and she didn't know the answer. And I won't go on into the mutilation that also existed, but she decided to go to that Congress thinking there might be meaning if she could actually tell women of the world about what had happened. Another woman had been raped by 15 men, again in wartime. And she had the courage to say, I'm pregnant, and I've decided to keep this child of the enemy and raise it with unconditional love. And the third woman had been lit on fire because her dowry was insufficient in the eyes of her husband. And they thought she died, but she didn't. All those three women sold everything they had to go to this Congress. I can remember vividly weeping as I read the chapter, and I immediately called Jean, my wife, and said, the decision is made. The women suffered not because of other women, but because of men. And we need to do something to begin to change how men are in the world. Not necessarily that extreme, but we need to begin at home. So that was probably the feature that really tipped me over and saying, yes, I'm going to do something different for the rest of my career. That's a very long answer to your question.
Wow, thank you for that.
It's a powerful and profound one. I know that in other talks you've talked about transitions. I could see that was a transition for you. But your answer, David, is also for our audience and for me and Katrina, just hearing that men's issues affect all of us, right? Yeah. And so the fact that you're taking this on, not just to help guys, men, but to recognize the profound influence that will have throughout society and communities, which is, part of what Blueprint is all about. So I have a question for you. And I think you've answered it beautifully in one aspect, which is we know that people have personal experiences and that fuels their passions for what they're all about now. Did you, David, when growing up, have a positive father figure in your formative years?
I did. And one of the other seeds of this whole work would be my own home. My father suffered from severe depression. And so there were times in his life when the illness held him hostage and he couldn't be the kind of father that he would have wished it or wanted to be. So, and also because of that, I grew up on a chicken farm on the prairies just north of North Dakota. So I know cold winters. But in any case, because of his illness, our family doctor used to come by our house regularly, sometimes every 2 or 3 weeks. In hindsight, I think I realized now that he was doing that to keep an eye on us, to make sure we were doing all right. And he was a positive father figure. It's not surprising that I became a physician. He very much played a big role in my life. And as did my mother's youngest brother, who was often spent, he was a lot younger than my mom. So he spent a lot of time on our farm. And he also took an interest in me, making sure that I would look at possibilities of university and education beyond farming. So yes, I had the benefit of positive father figures.
Wow.
I also had the anguish of a father who suffered.
Yes. Jefferson and I really relate to that. I have a father who was bipolar.
That was my father.
Your father was as well.
Yeah.
So I relate to that. And it is such a blessing when we can find father figures, and it might not be. And then we know when our fathers are struggling. I mean, my father personally always was trying to be the best guy he could be, but they get knocked down, and you get knocked down and you get back up. And that's a good role model as well. So I was thinking, you talk a lot about aspirational masculinity. I love that term. And I was wondering, so when you say that as something to aspire to shoot for, could you define for us that kind of masculinity that might be unhealthy for men, and then define what you mean by aspirational masculinity as the opposite of that?
Yes, I'd be pleased to. My sense of masculinity is there's nothing inherently wrong with masculinity. However, over centuries and generations, now there's words that we use as adjectives, but it's almost like one word. Toxic masculinity has become either hyphenated or a single word, patriarchal masculinity. So we've really begun to ask, what does that mean in terms of who we are? And often it means that we strive to be self-sufficient. We are stoic. We don't integrate the emotions that we might experience except for anger. And we're very independent and separate often from others, other men. Sometimes we're afraid of other men because we fear we won't measure up. We won't be man enough. And that can mean many things in terms of who we are. So our goal is to shift that, to ask the question, who can I be as a man in a positive way? who can I be in terms of who can I aspire to be with regard to my emotional experiences, so that I don't feel ashamed or embarrassed that I feel sad and I actually want to cry. And that doesn't make me weak, and it doesn't make me feminine. And just imagine what a disgrace and a disservice that does if we say crying makes us like girls. So now we're denigrating women for expressing an emotion. And so that we're really working to look at aspiring to integrate all of our emotions into who we are. If emotions didn't serve a purpose, evolution would have gotten rid of them long ago. So how do we become aware of those? Often men say, I'm numb, I don't feel anything. So to aspire to be integrated, to aspire to be inclusive in our communities, especially of people who are other, who are different from me for whatever reason. And for us, in terms of me, a cisgender male, how do I become aware of my privilege and use it to develop and strengthen community rather than continue in being oblivious to what that means? And that means I need to continue learning and asking questions. But
right, and I'm sorry to cut you up. And as a soldier of therapy, I'm sure you've studied it, and you understand your father's struggles. Katrina's father had bipolar disorder, but he was kind of an absent father. I had a very proactive, negative, toxic father. Right. And so what you're describing is what a lot of guys, I'm going to say, put myself in that category. It was hard to ask for help. Yes. And when I did, I felt less than, I felt weak. And all the things that you're describing, I'm so happy that you're taking it head on. In addition to what you've already said, in your recent research, what seems to be the main roadblocks that keep men from making progress in this area?
First of all, hats off to you for acknowledging publicly that you have a therapist, as do I. I couldn't do this without help. I wouldn't be here without the help of others in terms of that inward journey. And despite the fact that I was very afraid of it all through my high school, I didn't tell people that my father was bipolar or very depressed and that it was hard to go home. So and that's part of it in terms of the need to be silent, the desire to be seen as being strong, as being independent, as not
stoic.
And the confusing piece about stoicism is it is a desirable trait. When I'm in an emergency room working as a physician and a kid comes in from a very serious accident, a motor vehicle accident that might have caused serious injury, is not the time for me to think, oh, how terrible, this is very sad. It's time to go very cognitive and say, I've got to get rid of that emotion, despite the fact that this child reminds me of one of my kids. I can't go there. I got to go into the algorithms. I've got to go into the treatment. I got to keep this kid alive. And it's the same for firefighters. Firefighters run into the very things that the rest of us run away from.
Right.
And they too have to be stoic. However, we know that if we're stoic too often, sometimes we don't know how to leave the stoicism at the workplace. And so that I have to be willing to say that, and it's a feature of leadership, is vulnerability. I have to be willing to say, I'm going to be vulnerable at the dinner table, to say to my kids, I had a really hard day at work. I wished I didn't have to go to work tomorrow. Or not to necessarily disclose to your kids the trauma that you were exposed to, but to say to somebody, I'm really having difficulty inside of myself because I can't get rid of the image of the reviewing of the constant reminder of what I saw in that fire in that building. So I think it's the fear of being seen as weak or girlish if we admit to what's going on. I think grief is a huge issue for men and unresolved or unintegrated, because I can't afford to be sad, because I'll never stop crying if I start. So it's really some of those myths that exist and keep us separate, keep us isolated.
Wow, that is a lot to unpack and so wonderful.
Thank you for that answer.
So here's a question from one of our listeners. Here it is. So you had said you like questions from listeners and whatnot. So she said, I think we can safely say, and I would agree, that taking a posture of shaming men is definitely not productive. At the same time, unfortunately, there seems to be a lot of messaging out there that encourages unhealthy behavior and not many opportunities for men to self-reflect. So what are your thoughts on that idea?
I would agree with the person asking the question. Shaming is corrosive. Shaming leaves people feeling like they're inadequate, never good enough, and not ever possibly being able to be good enough. And it results in isolation and paralysis. And so that it actually has individuals moving away from community rather than into community. Because when I feel the shame, and we see it in social media, we see it in movies, we see it in many places where the dad is the idiot. The dad doesn't know how to do the laundry. He's always making foolish and stupid mistakes. And I understand it, the whole feature of toxic masculinity and wanting to expose men for the dark side, for the negative features of how they've contributed to society. It's understandable. However, leaving men in shame means nothing will change.
Absolutely.
And we see that one of the antidotes to shame is honor. If, for example, one of you, and I see it now, we work in groups of firefighters, which includes men and women. And we've had 2 groups where half of them acknowledge for the first time in the company of other men their early childhood sexual abuse. And I can now begin to sense when that's going to happen. And the first thing they'll do, because of their shame, and it could be decades earlier, they start looking away. They start looking to the ground, to the floor, to the ceiling, but they won't be looking at me. So one of the things I would say to them is, before you continue in your story, I'm going to invite you to just look at me. What you've experienced is not your fault. And inherently in who you are as a person, it's not shameful. So as you speak, I'd like you to look in my eyes and keep telling your story, because I'm aware that the antidote, the opposite, the intervention, one of the interventions for shame is to bring honor to you and to your story. So every time you look away, I'm going to ask you to look at me. Just keep looking at me. And, we can imagine there's nobody else in the room, but they're going to listen. And we're going to ask them later how they respond to your experience. They're going to have to self-reflect. So that we need to work against the shame. We have to be accountable for our deeds and our actions, yes. And some of them are shameful, but we have to be really careful that we don't shame all of men, all of masculinity, and separate the act from the person. So that I don't start, as soon as I've interpreted that there's something inherently wrong with me, I'm in trouble.
Well, you know what you're saying too is you're building a bridge, really, because yes, if I am shamed, I'm already feeling shame, right? If I've had it, I'm just going to speak for myself. With an abusive father, you internalize a lot of that shame, and so you're already feeling shame. And when someone piles on, all you can do is react in some sort of self-defensive way, because you can't. It's so difficult to take. So, if I may piggyback on that profound answer, this is from me and my brothers. This next question.
Okay. So,
and I've been on this journey. Some of my brothers have not found ways to get to therapy yet. And I'm not shaming you if you're watching, but I am suggesting it could be helpful. How does a young man, have either of you seen this show on Netflix called I Am a Killer? I bring this up because, David, what you were sharing was there is it's propitiated through, like if I experience abuse, many times I might follow into that without thinking. I just am going to have abuse on, put abuse on others. So how does a young man with an abusive or absent father become a healthy, functioning adult?
That's a great question. You're absolutely right. I think it's very important for us as fathers to acknowledge that boys fashion their lives after us, consciously and unconsciously, so that even though I might say I will never abuse my children, one day I will do something and I'll think, oh my God, it's just like my dad. Because the unconscious can be very strong. And it's also important for us to realize that women pattern their relationships with men after their relationships with their father. I mean, it's not absolute, but those are features that are important to us to recognize and appreciate. So it's one of the most important questions we can ask, and all of us need to ask it, is what impact did the home I grew up in have on me? Even if it's the most idyllic home, every person still needs to ask that question in terms of their journey into their own adulthood, their own sense of who they really are. need to ask that question, so that it starts with that adolescent boy, perhaps, or somebody in his early 20s, or maybe when he has his first child, to say, who am I? Mm-hmm. And what impact did that have on me? And what price did I pay?
Wow.
What did I learn? What is it costing me now in my relationship with myself, with other men, because we all sort of fear other men, and with women? And I'm always conscious now of being too binary. How do I relate to others? Mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. And but it has to start with, how do I relate to myself? What's my relationship with myself, my own sense of intimacy? And can I go into it looking at the internal landscape rather than just living in the external landscape? You got to pause and ask the question. And you have to be intentional.
Be intentional, you just said. Be intentional about it. It's so true. And that's one of the hardest things to do, honestly.
And the other part is, because likely you're going to feel hurt, but we also know that hurt people hurt people. So I've got to ask, what is my hurt? Right? What is my hurt from what I got? What is my hurt from what I didn't get? Right? And that then goes to grief is wanting what we, more of what we never got, or grief is getting what we didn't want. So it's looking at all that.
So I'm just curious, as an addendum to my first question there, is this how you developed the philosophy of journey into integrity?
Yes, absolutely. Duncan and I worked together for many years, and then John joined us after we'd started. And what we realized is that there's a lot of focus on the physical health of men, and we're all for that. But we really wanted to go beyond that, to recognize that we wanted to work with well-being, which looks at psychological and spiritual well-being, not just physical well-being. And we then also realized that we wanted to use another word like integrity. And by integrity, we look more at the sense of integration of who we are as men, because we're not very integrated with regard to our emotional experiences. And that's where that word really had a double meaning. We want to live with integrity, but we also want to live as an integrated human being.
That is an excellent way to flip that word. I love that. And it's true, as a woman, I think we are so much, there's just so much more permission to be emotional and all of these things. And I've never thought of that maybe women inherently, because of the permission they've been given, the way they are, we are more integrated emotionally. But all of these things you're saying, I really can relate to myself, and just this idea, how did your childhood affect you? How is that, be intentional about really understanding where you've been hurt and how you might hurt others because of what hurt you, and breaking that chain, raising our children, or being a person in the world, relating to men and women. I think this is such an important subject to be discussing this around Father's Day as well, and also just to be bringing to light in this day and age when there is so much criticism. It's sometimes, I hear from friends, I don't even know what to say or how to act, or, the words to use, but to be bringing this all to light, and encouraging men to recognize, their emotions, go through therapy. And I too have been in therapy. It's definitely so helpful. So with all this kind of information that you're coming with, all these ideas, this research that you've done, you have really come from a scientific approach for all of this. So which I think is amazing. This isn't just some touchy-feely whatever. You're a real scientist. Will you tell us a little bit about that, and then how you are distributing this kind of information to men and others?
Absolutely. Jeff, I'm going to say one more thing. Alice Miller said the way we survive our childhood is also how we survive our adulthood, and it doesn't always serve us very well. So
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time? Who said that? Who said that?
Alice Miller.
Alice Miller, because I'm saying that for our audience's sake too, in case they want to look this up. Yep. Alice Miller said, "Say that again, please." This is all for me. This is just for me.
I'm pleased to give it to you again. The way we survive our childhood is how we survive our adulthood, and it may not serve us very well.
Wow, amazing.
I love that. That's my other tattoo. That'll be my. I don't have any tattoos, but that would be one. Wow.
I'll give it to you, provided you give credit where credit's due. So Alice Miller must be part of the tattoo.
You know what? Can I just say something about that too? Because being in therapy, Katrina's probably heard the same thing. What is it? The eight stages, and Erickson said there's eight stages of development.
Yes.
And so however we, worked and survived, say age 0 to 10, sometimes if it's traumatized, like mine was, you cling to certain things that. This is exactly like something my therapist, what do you know? They know what they're talking about. So he was just saying that.
And I'm so pleased you mentioned Erickson.
Okay.
Because the last stage, the 8th stage, has to do with despair and integrity. That's where.
Can you just, for our audience, tell them who Erickson is?
A sociologist who really just looked at, a psychologist who looked at the world and watched children enough to then develop 8 stages of development from early childhood to adulthood, retirement, and our lives before death. I think he may have added a 9th, but it's not as well known. So we'll stick with the 8th. And the 8th is despair to integrity. And because I worked with people at the end of life, I saw that, and it doesn't matter what age you are, when you've been told you have a terminal diagnosis, you're in 8th stage. And the irony of the despair is it's what we're familiar with. So that, in using Jeff, your example as childhood, your despair of childhood abuse is your familiar. It's your go-to place. So despite the discomfort, we go to the place of despair. And only when we can begin to integrate all of those features that have caused the despair do we move toward integrity. Because now we're more integrated. It's why you can't get over your grief. You have to integrate the grief, the sense of loss, right? And the value of the moving from the despair toward integrity, regardless of whether you move just a small amount or toward a comprehensive integrated life, the two benefits are wisdom, you gain wisdom from doing that, and compassion for self and other. So it's a really important feature of development. So I'm really glad you introduced Erickson. And I have now forgotten the 2 questions.
Yeah, don't worry. I'll just, basically.
Sorry, Kat. Sorry, go ahead.
I think maybe it's a good time just to talk a little bit about some of the studies you've done, just to kind of let our audience know how you're not just kind of fly by night. You're really studying this and exploring these issues in a concrete scientific way.
That's right. And that was the intent when we started, is that, I am an academic. I have an academic appointment, and I work off campus. So I've got both those worlds. And what we really wanted to do is have an academic foundation, but be more like a social enterprise. We want to do most of our work off campus, but we also said it needs to be evidence-based. So our philosophy, we start with never about you without you. So one of the first invitations we had is to work with hockey players, the NHL moving in transition from being professional hockey players to retirement. Then we were invited by the Provincial Firefighters Association to help them address the trauma and the despair that was going on in the departments because of the high rate of suicide. So with both of those populations and our philosophy, never about you without you, we interview people in the field before we start a program. So I'll use the firefighters as an example, that we interviewed 25 of them first to just understand what's it like going to work. What's your responsibility? What's it like to run toward everything that we run away from? What's it like to live in a bubble unto yourselves because you protect me from all of this disaster and the harmful things you see, so I can live the comfortable life I live? What's it like to be in that bubble? So, and then after we got that information, we developed a program to begin to address resiliency and how do we work with these men and women who are exposed to this trauma. And so we created the program, but we evaluated it. And unless we are actually improving somebody's life and we're doing what we believe we're doing, we change it. So it's an iterative process. We ran 10 of those groups and then realized this is good. We demonstrated that there's diminished depression that lasts for at least 6 months. There's diminished features of trauma, and there's an enhanced sense of well-being. So then we started running the program, and because of its effectiveness, the police department asked us if we would develop a program for the police, because they wanted some of the benefit for their members that they've witnessed in the firefighters. And we said, we'll do that, but we have to interview 25 policemen first, police people, women, men and women. So again, we did that, and we just started before the pandemic. And because it's in person, we ran 2 programs, but we're not at the end product, if you can use that just yet. But all of what we do must have an evaluative component, whether it's university athletes or firefighters, or we're now doing a study also on the impact of Me Too on business leaders.
Oh, yeah.
I love that.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, Katrina and I are fans of this, because what you do is you look, what is the need, and then you develop the program rather than just thinking in an academic way, well, this might be nice.
How are people going to be finding out more about you with those kind of programs?
It's far it's been word of mouth, because we also wanted to develop programs and have evidence about our work before we actually went out there to talk to people about it. We didn't want to just describe, this is what we plan to do. We wanted to be able to say, this is what we do. And so that we only work in collaboration with others, so that the BC Professional Firefighters Association is as much about this project as we are, so that they recruit the firefighters. They arrange for the facility where we do the work. And we're now, after COVID, we'll likely look at developing a train-the-trainer program, because we don't want to go across the country delivering the program. We want to create the programs that are evidence-based and that others can then do. And there's been an organization that's just asked that actually if they could evaluate the program as an outsider, because that'll strengthen the evidence that it's an effective program, because we have an internal evaluation which was done anonymously, and it's ethical, and it's still is positive evidence. It will be stronger to have a third party that we're not part of that looks at this program and evaluates it. So we're very pleased about that. And they'll do both the police and the firefighter program.
That's phenomenal. And you've also brought it to the United States as well. You're up there in Canada, but I think you've worked with Stanford or done some kind of program.
Hats off to Stanford. We did a design sprint. We invited athletes, coaches, professional and university athletes to a one-day event we had in San Francisco, asking if we developed something for athletes that would not be so much about being better athletes, but being better people. And Stanford soccer team invited us to Stanford and said, we'd love to be the first. We'd love to have you develop something here with the soccer players. We interviewed 10 of the 23 young men to understand what are the complexities of being athletes, being academic, and being social. So we work with the players. We don't do lectures. We create an environment where we invite them to speak about their experience and their truth. And so we developed that program, and we're then invited to come to other universities as well. And now UBC will be our living lab. So we're working very closely with our own university with the intent of also then developing programs that will be effective in other universities. All of this has taken a pause, although we've converted our programs to virtual programs. But we look forward again to being with people in person. There's something to be said for relationship in person.
We agree.
Yes, for sure. And I think you'll be getting a lot of people asking you to help them out.
Yeah, I hope so. You had said that, in one of your talks, you said listening is such a huge component of how you do what you do well. And I think that you also said that given the time you had spent dealing with end-of-life perspectives, you've even written a couple of books about it. How has that informed your work with Blueprint?
The years in which I did that work, and then it was the work, the study I did was actually my dissertation, asking people what it was like to know they were dying, because they'd all been given a diagnosis of cancer or AIDS with a prognosis of 6 to 12 months of life expectancy. And so the way it was designed is I interviewed them, went away, transcribed, identified themes, went back to them and said, did I understand you? And they would correct me. They'd say, no.
Oh.
And I'd say, even though I was reading the transcript, they'd say, no, I didn't say that. So I'd say, well, help me understand what it is you might have wanted me to understand from this. So we worked at it until we identified the themes that emerged from that. So it was a very qualitative study. And I interviewed some of them 10 times. So I really got to know them well. And so what did I learn from that? a few things. The most important question that all of them asked is, who am I? Then another question was, what do I want, comma, really? Which isn't about accumulation of goods. It's about, what do I want in terms of who I am as a person, in terms of my relationships with the people I love? And then the other lesson was from them, I remember a number of the, more so with the young men with HIV and AIDS than with people with cancer, they would say to me, don't wait until you have a diagnosis of a terminal illness before you live who you really are. So it was who I am, what do you want, and don't waste a minute.
Wow.
No.
Those are
Powerful.
powerful questions, statements to live by.
Yeah.
Right. And so such important values to try to kind of suss out from all of us and dig deep in our souls to answer those questions. I'm going to be doing that when we stop this. I'm going to be thinking a lot about what you've talked about today. Good. So on the Blueprint website, another value you mentioned is that it's allied to all genders to positively influence the culture of men in service of families, communities, and the world. Awesome. So can you just expound a little more about how it all plays out in the work that you do?
When you sent me the questions ahead of time, This was the most anxiety provoking.
Oh, no.
And I'm glad you asked it. It's the only question I called one of my colleagues and said, I'm not stuck, but I'm concerned. And I'll tell you why. Look at me. I am a man of privilege. Regardless, I'm a person of privilege, regardless of my family history of mental illness, of poverty, or, it doesn't matter. None of that matters. I am in society a very privileged, older white male. I have contributed to a lot of crap in the world. So that's why I'm cautious, because we want to be inclusive. We don't want to be binary. We want to work with sons and daughters, and we want to work with people who don't identify in ways that we might be familiar or comfortable with. I just read something recently that I don't even understand. So I realized my ego wants to have the perfect answer for your question. The reality is I don't have it. And that what the answer to your question is that Duncan, John, and I struggle with this regularly, because Duncan is younger than John and I, but we're all white males, and we want to proceed with caution. We want to be doing the work. We want people to know that we wouldn't intentionally hurt them, and we will still make mistakes, and that we want to be men that are aware of people in the community who might be on the outer circles of that community, and what can we do to invite them in. And then there might be some who are so hurt by what's happened, they're not even see themselves as part of the community. And is there a space for them? So that the answer to your question is, it's a struggle, and we're committed to it. And we're committed to ask for forgiveness when we make an error. We're also very aware that we need to do our own work. We need to read. We need to understand. We can't be learning at the expense of people who've already paid the price of being othered. So it's an ongoing challenge for us. And to keep it just the same as I said about the young person, young man, young woman, what people who identify as such, to ask the question, what impact did my family have on me? We have to ask the same question. What impact did that have on us and our attitudes toward people who are different from us? And so we want to be all inclusive, and it's not easy, nor is it simple.
Yeah, what I love about that too is that I think I heard this somewhere, that the beginning of wisdom is recognizing what you don't know. And so the fact that you're leaving yourself open to say, look, we'll do our best, but we're going to make mistakes. I have to jump in here and say, I've worked in religious circles for years and years and years. And there were so many people that would confide in me. Well, they knew I was emotionally available, I guess, but they would confide in me. Let's say they were gay. And they said, does God hate me? I mean, so This is, you were speaking about the other and how people are othered through, unexamined lives. Can I say it that way? So Katrina and I have talked about this in the past too, that if you're not intentionally examining your life, you are doomed, held hostage to your past and your prejudices and whatever. And so I applaud, and Katrina and I try to do this too, recognizing our position in society I know people don't like to hear the word privilege, but it is. And then recognizing also, okay, if that's true, if I've been given advantages and I have some power, how can I spend that power to help others, to stay connected and create a positive connectivity and push back against prejudice? And that's not always going to be fun.
No.
But so thank you again for this work that you're doing, and because you're trying to stay enlightened yourself. And I think, again, you recognize what you don't know. Now, in regards to Blueprint, and I think to make an impact with men who are maybe being held hostage to machoism or whatever, I know that you choose carefully who you, and intentionally is the word I guess I should say, who you partner with. Because I know that, who do men follow? Is that correct to say it that way?
That's right. We decided to take an iconic approach in terms of also asking the question, though, where are men? And where are men? Men are at play. They love sports. They like watching sports. They like playing sports. So we decided we would work with athletes. Men are at work. So we decided what are iconic jobs, and perhaps not so much as they may have been in the past. The men who protect us, and firefighters now have a greater popularity than police officers, and I don't want to go into that here. We see the opportunity to work with those men, and men as business leaders. And ultimately, many men have chosen or will choose or become fathers by choice or not by choice. So we really decided that those are the areas that we would focus on. And interestingly, a lot of the organizations that we work with have come to us. And so that if they are then wanting to collaborate in a way that allows us to be geeky and academic, because we won't agree to work with them if we can't measure it, and apply the academic component. So that's where we've come to be working with the groups that we're working with.
That sounds amazing and makes so much sense. And there is just so much more to talk about. This has been so enlightening in so many ways. And I'm really excited that our audience gets to know you all and hear that something like this exists, because I've never heard of anything like this. And you all are doing this as a nonprofit called Blueprint.ngo. You can find that online. And as we're kind of wrapping up right now, we wanted to ask, Jefferson and I wanted to ask a couple questions to help our audience synthesize what we covered today and kind of be able to have some takeaways. It's a very important subject right now for everyone. So what would you say are 3 things men can do to work towards a more integrated and healthy masculinity?
It'll be somewhat redundant to some degree. Is first ask the question and mean to ask the question, who am I? Which means that I pause. And part of the who am I and who do I want to be are part of the same question. And then what do I need to do to become that person? So it really means that, and you can't do that without designating time away, time by yourself. We need to spend time with ourselves that might be comfortable or uncomfortable, but we need to ask some really tough questions. And then in that context also, as a man, I need to be honest. How am I in relationship with intimacy, and which is much more than just sexual? Do I have an intimate relationship with myself? Can I be intimate with other men? Meaning, can I let them see my soft side, for lack of a better term? Can I let them see all of my emotional experiences? Can I ask them for help? And can I do that same thing with my partner, with my wife and my children? And then the other part is am I in community? What does it mean to be in community? And what does it mean to invite other people into community? So it's not just about myself. It starts there. I have to have the self-awareness and intention about who I am and some honesty, but it needs to be focused elsewhere. And one of the things that we talk about is people know the golden rule about treating others the way you want to be treated. We don't go there. We want to treat others the way they want to be treated. So that we want to end the othering. So that first it's self, other, and perhaps then other with a capital O, my sense of connection to something bigger than myself. So it really includes all of those components of who we are and how do we want to be in the the world.
These are important, certainly. I'm taking notes, guys. If all the guys watching, I'm sure we're all taking notes. Now, let me ask maybe what some guys watching might be thinking. This is what I'm thinking too. What advice? Okay, so we're hearing what you're saying. And some of us, we've lived all our lives a certain way. So we've got a familiarity, something we talked about earlier, with things that maybe aren't necessarily healthy. I want to make a change, but the mountain seems so big. So what advice would you give to men who want to begin living a healthier, authentic, and I know that's a word you like to use, authentic lifestyle, but we don't know where to start?
So I agree. You got to start with baby steps. You got to start with small things. In terms of it has to do, am I willing, for example, I'm going to use you, Jeff. Are you, Jeff, willing to go into the grief that you need to go to? Because if you don't grieve the loss of the father, if I don't grieve the loss of the absence of my father during the times when he was severely depressed, I'm stuck.
David, can I pause you? I want you to keep going, but I got to say, that's what and anybody that's been in therapy, we think we have to run away from pain, right? And what you're suggesting is to get by, you got to go through it to sort of like just to live with it. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. And if Jeff, if we were friends or I was your therapist or we had a different relationship.
Yes to both.
Virtual, I would say to you, all right, let's do this. And I would come and sit next to you. And I know that men might feel intimidated by hugging, but I would sit next to you so that my right shoulder touched your left shoulder. And so I would say, now let's do this. Tell me what it was like. I don't want to hear all the details, but I do want to have an understanding. I want to work hard to understand your life with your dad. Even though it might be exactly the same as mine, I need to understand it from your perspective. I need to understand what you felt, what your behavior was, what was your experience. And I'm going to sit here with my shoulder next to yours. So you know what? All of those years you were alone. Today, you're not alone. Right? Today, my shoulder will touch your shoulder. And unfortunately, you have to go there to leave it behind, to integrate it into who you are. And someday, it's like trauma. People who've been traumatized, they feel like they're living it in 3 dimensions. It comes back to them. It haunts them. Once they've been through therapy, it's like it's still there in black and white, in a book, high up on the bookshelf. They can't deny that book exists, but they're not living in that book again. And that's what needs to also happen. So that we got to go. That's the first step, is that self-awareness. And can you invite somebody else to join you on that journey? And therapists are great, but so are good friends.
Absolutely. Those are words of wisdom, all of those. I like that. So I don't even know if this is too simplistic really, but is there one important practice or some kind of practice that men can just literally add to their daily routine that might help them take the baby step? Or
spend 5 minutes by yourself every day in silence. Don't do anything else. And just listen to your breathing, listen to nature, and also get outside. Men's spirituality exists in nature. It might be true for, right.
Yes, absolutely. I can really relate to that.
Can I just tell you, as a guy, how terrifying that is? Because I feel like, I've always
that's why it's only 5 minutes.
I know, but what I'm saying is I'm running from one distraction to another, and just to sit with your own thoughts for 5. Thank you for that, because I feel like, and that's going to be a challenge.
Remember, we default to the familiar. We default to the place we've always been, even if it's uncomfortable. So, am I prepared to 5 minutes a day to say, I'm going to do this thing differently?
I love that. So David, what has been, if you can, and maybe there's more than one, but what do you think has been the most rewarding thing about the work that you do through Blueprint?
I can tell you, being a dad's really important to me. Being a dad to my 2 daughters is definitely one of the biggest priorities in my life. And I'm so glad I worked with people at the end of life, because here's some self-disclosure. My father may have been absent because of a mental illness. I realized I was absent because I was taking my job as a physician too seriously. So that history repeats itself, but in different ways. And the moment I realized that I wasn't as emotionally available for my 2 daughters as I wanted to be the dad I wished I'd had, it changed my life. So I'll tell you, the most significant thing I can tell you, after we worked with a group of firefighters, and the question again came to say, how can I be a good dad? And I'd listened to this fellow talking, and I said, you know what you can do? 2 things. When you go home today, I know you've got one of your boys is younger than the other 2. Play with him the way he wants to play with you. But before you do that, I want you to go home and give each of your guys a hug. And hug them until they let go. Because a lot of men are afraid of hugging their sons because it's their own homophobia. So within 24 hours after that workshop ended, I got an email, and it's one of the emails I treasure most. He said, "Dear David, you were so right. I came home and I hugged my 3 sons. One of them for 5 seconds, one of them for 7 seconds, and one of them for 2 minutes. He needed his dad to hold him." And he said, and the other thing I've done, I sat down on the floor with my 12-year-old and we played. And I've never done that before. That is one of the most significant emails I've ever received. Because it's not just about the dad, it's those 3 boys. Those 3 boys who have the fullness of their father's presence, right? I mean, this is a bit cliche. What I say is that when kids are young, they need the softness of the mother's breast. When they're older in their adolescence, they need the firmness of their father's chests. They need to feel that bear hug. They need to feel that embrace and say, I've got your back regardless of what happens. So here's what I say to them. Every kid needs to hear this message from their dads, from their moms too, but I'm not a mom. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I wouldn't have wanted to live my life without you in it. And when you say that to your kids, give them a kiss right there and say, that's what that kiss represents. So someday when you're way out somewhere else in the world, and you may be 37 years old and you're feeling alone and dark, just touch your head right there. And remember this message. I'm with you. I got your back.
And I wouldn't want to live life without you.
Yeah.
Okay. These are the most poignant points, and what great advice. David, I'm going to take this as a mom too and take it to my kids. My husband's next to me right now, who produces this podcast, and I know he's literally writing down notes on this. And I really hope that our listeners get through all the way to the end of this amazing interview with you, David. I cannot thank you enough. Jefferson and I cannot thank you enough. I don't want this to end, but I think we have to now. But we just want to thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom, insights, just for being with us today. Thank you so much. Thank you for doing the work you're doing. For our audience, if you would like to find out more about Blueprint and what they do to encourage aspirational masculinity, then be sure to go to their website at Blueprint.ngo. David, you've given us so much to think about, and I'm sure it's more than fair to say that Blueprint, made up of you and your partners, is made up of some of the most crazy, amazing humans anyone could come across. And we just want you to keep up the great work and know we're here to support you in any way we can. Thank you so much.
I want you to feel, I want you to feel something crazy, crazy, amazing.
So that's our podcast. We want to thank Dr. David Kuhl for being so cool and for sharing his research, wisdom, and insights into helping men move towards a more aspirational masculinity through Blueprint. And if you've enjoyed today's episode and you think it would be meaningful and helpful for someone you know, be a crazy, amazing human and share it with them.
A couple of quick reminders. Make sure to subscribe to the Crazy Amazing Humans podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We've also filmed the podcast, so you can check us out on the Crazy Amazing Humans YouTube channel. Make sure and leave comments. We love to hear what you're thinking.
Absolutely. And most of all, we want to be sure to thank you for being with us today, for listening. And we want to remind you that every little kindness has the potential to create crazy, amazing human experiences, one person at a time.
And as always, this week, we want to encourage you to find one thing that you can do to extend kindness and love in the world. I'm Jefferson Denham.
And I'm Katrina Carlson. Stay healthy, stay connected, and we'll see you next time on the Crazy Amazing Humans podcast.
I want you to feel, I want you to feel something crazy, crazy, amazing.
If you have any questions or comments about today's episode, please make sure to write us at crazyamazinghumans@gmail.com.